The David Hendricks family murder is a tragic and infamous case that occurred in Bloomington, Illinois, in 1983. David Hendricks was a 30-year-old businessman who lived in Bloomington with his wife, Susan, and their 3 children, 10-year-old Rebekah, 7-year-old Grace, and 5-year-old Benjamin. On November 7, 1983, while Hendricks was out of state on a business trip, his wife and the 3 children were found murdered in that home by a police officer performing a welfare check, requested after Hendricks was unable to reach them by phone. An axe and a butcher's knife were the murder weapons and had been left at the scene. As the investigation progressed, David Hendricks became the prime suspect in the case. Law enforcement authorities pointed to inconsistencies in his account of his whereabouts on the day of the murders and raised suspicions about his behavior after the discovery of the bodies. Hendricks was interviewed immediately on return from his trip and became the primary suspect due to his relationship with the victims and the police detectives' initial dissatisfaction with his demeanor. Hendricks was tried the following year. The trial was moved from Bloomington to Rockford, Illinois, 133 miles, 214 kilometers, away, where he was found guilty in a jury trial. The judge took the unusual step of indicating publicly that while he was not criticizing the jury for performing their duty, he was not personally convinced beyond reasonable doubt. Hendricks' guilt was questioned due to the prosecution's reliance on circumstantial evidence and the possible prejudicial effect of statements made about his religious beliefs. Among other factors, the prosecution attempted to link the murders to Hendricks' belief that divorce was a sin. Hendricks had recently hired female models to demonstrate his product for marketing materials. Some of these women gave testimony for the prosecution that Hendricks asked them to remove clothing and made intimate contact with their upper bodies during private test fittings. Since the brace was normally worn externally, expert witnesses were called to testify that regular clothing and a brief fitting time were more typical, emphasized with an in-court demonstration. The prosecution used these to form a circumstantial case for Hendricks being dissatisfied with his marriage and argued that since Hendricks did not believe in divorce, he had a motive to kill his wife and children. The prosecution argued for Hendricks' sole guilt, although no direct evidence of guilt was found on Hendricks, including a lack of blood contamination. His lawyers failed to challenge some other key pieces of the prosecution's evidence, such as how the order of killings was dubious for a sole killer acting on Hendricks' schedule that evening, and that the weapons and blood spatter suggested 2 perpetrators. There were signs of carelessly handled evidence by the investigating team, such as containers identified as the children's stomach contents containing material inconsistent with their known preferences. The contents had been used by an expert witness to establish a time of death prior to Hendricks leaving on his business trip. Hendricks was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. He served 7 years in Menard Correctional Center in Illinois. While incarcerated, Hendrick befriended his cellmate, convicted murderer and prison fugitive Henry Hillenbrand. Using a tape recorder and with Hillenbrand's blessing, Hendricks used his jail time to pen a novel about Hillenbrand's life. Hendricks married a second time while in prison. In 1991, the Illinois Supreme Court overturned the conviction and Hendricks was granted a retrial at the McLean County Law and Justice Center in Bloomington. A surprise prison witness for the prosecution claimed Hendricks had confessed the crime while incarcerated, but a jury was unconvinced and he was acquitted and released. Shortly afterward, he renounced his fundamentalist religious ties and moved to Florida to start another orthopedic business. He presently lives in Orlando, Florida with his 4th wife, Gazel. He recently sold his last business and is presumed retired. David Hendricks has maintained his innocence throughout the years. The case remains controversial, with some believing in his guilt while others argue that there was insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed the murders. The Hendricks family murder case is still remembered as one of the most shocking and tragic crimes in Bloomington's history, and it continues to captivate public interest and legal discussions to this day.